Hello and welcome everyone to the virtual book launch for COVID Chronicles, a comic anthology. This event is presented in partnership with the Seminary Co-op Bookstores and Graphic Mundi. My name is Marina Malazonia and I'm the marketing manager at Seminary Co-op Bookstores. And as some of you may know, the Co-op is the two bookstores located on the south side of Chicago in Hyde Park. And our stores were founded in 1961, and in 2019, we became the first not-for-profit bookstores whose mission is book selling. And this cultural mission allows us to keep over 100,000 books on the shelves and to work with like-minded cultural partners like Graphic Mundi to ensure events like these. And tonight's event is moderated by Matthew Noe. Matthew is lead collection and knowledge management librarian at Harvard Medical School. He is a member of the boards of both Graphic Medicine International Collection and the American Library Association Graphic Novels and Comics Roundtable. I will now turn it over to Matthew to introduce the panelists.
Thanks, Marina. Hi, everybody. First, thank you all for coming here tonight. And so I'm just gonna get us started with our panelists and do a round robin introduction. First up, we have Kendra. Kate, do you have our slides? Thanks. So what I'm gonna do is have each panelist introduce themselves briefly, and while they're talking, you'll see an example of their contribution to the anthology on the screen. So Kendra, you're all set?
Okay, thank you. Kate, would you mind going back to the cover of COVID Chronicles for just 2 seconds? And before we get to that, if that's convenient. Thank you. Good. Well, hello, everybody. My name is Kendra Boileau. I'm the editor-in-chief and assistant director of Penn State University Press, also the publisher of Graphic Mundi, which is a new imprint of comics and graphic novels for adults and young adults. Happy to say that the book we are here to talk about this evening, COVID Chronicles, a Comics Anthology, is in fact the first book in the Graphic Mundi imprint. So as we launch this book tonight, we're also launching the Graphic Mundi. If you'd like to learn more about Graphic Mundi, please go to graphicmundi.org. You can see what our mission is all about and get a sense of forthcoming books in the imprint. I want to thank you all for coming. I see a lot of friends here in the chat. Thanks for letting us know you're here. Not only friends, but also contributors to the volume, which is really wonderful to see. And so my role in this project was to be the volume editor, which I did with the help of Rich Johnson, who is a comics publishing consultant who has been working with the press for the past year to help us get Graphic Mundi off the ground and off to a good start. So that, and then I also had the great pleasure of working with one of the talented creators, the brilliant graphic artist, Eli Nugeboren, who is here. Hi, Eli. And I scripted one of his comics, the one on the right, Dr. Anthony Fauci, MVP, and that was a lot of fun to do. So that is my, those are my contributions, and I guess we'll move on to the next contributor.
Thanks, Kendra, for the background and for showing us this slide. And yeah, Dr. Fauci is definitely an MVP for us here in the US. So next up, we have Jason, if you want to say hello.
Hello, it's good to be here. Thanks for having me. This is my COVID diary that you can see on the screen now. That I unfortunately got the virus very early on in the pandemic. My wife and I live in Manhattan, and we, despite all efforts, you know, gloves, masks, wiping down the banisters of our 100-year-old tenement building with bleach, we still got the virus. So I didn't know what the symptoms were, because every time I Googled, I got something different. So I just wrote down what my symptoms were, and then did what I do in the face of danger, is make jokes, and then draw cartoons. So I published it, and I got a lot of, it traveled far and wide with people who were wondering what the onset of symptoms were and what to expect if they did get it. So we're slightly, pretty much fully recovered now. But yeah, it was a hell of a ride.
Well, thanks for being here, Jason. And yeah, your diary comic here is hilarious. Like it's nice to see something funny in a terrible situation.
It's my specialty.
Right. So next up we have Sarah. Sarah, if you want to tell us about your contribution.
Hello. Hi from Australia, where it's 11 a.m. and I'm jacked on coffee while you're all having wine. So my comic was looking very much at you know, the Australian context of COVID hitting straight off the back of some of the very worst bushfires we've ever had in this country. And so, you know, the start of 2020 was quite apocalyptic, with a huge amount of loss of life. And I really wanted to explore in my comic this difficult kind of cognitive dissonance of quietness and, you know, the huge trauma that's sweeping the whole world. But then also looking at how, because of the lockdowns here, so where I am in Melbourne, we had a lockdown, our first lockdown, and then a second, and we've just come out of our third. And the thing that's been fascinating for me is that with the lockdowns, because there's less people out and about on the streets, there's been a real explosion of bird life, of native mammals, these kinds of things. So I was kind of trying to look at these, you know, positive and negative tensions that are occurring in my local sphere. Yeah.
Thanks, Sarah. Yeah, 20 apocalyptic in 2020 was basically the theme for the entire year, and it seems to be following us into 2021, unfortunately. Next up, we have Rob. If you want to say hello and tell us about your contribution.
Yeah, hi. I basically did a series, like I did 5 diary comics, like, and I would script them at the end. No, I would script them the next day, like what happened. I would just kind of like put it all down, take notes and stuff. I wanted to record basically what was happening, because, you know, we cartoonists, we often do that. We want to mark this moment. And aside from not really knowing what was going on and being really anxious about like our jobs, our new living quarters, our health, it was a real huge financial stresses. You know, we weren't sure what was going to happen. Not only was it therapeutic to do, it also just gave me something to do while I was in lockdown. I would, rather than freaking out about what was happening, I could worry about, well, how do I draw myself on the toilet in that one scene, like without it being really gross? And it was like kind of problem solving. And I feel like I put in dollops of humor along with it. And, you know, it was basically a kind of therapeutic for me to do it. And they ran in the Comics Journal first. I did the Cartoonist Diary series. That's what ran in. But I really wanted to be a part of this book because, you know, as I said, we're cartoonists and we have to kind of tell everybody what we went through during a very scary time.
Thanks, Rob. Yeah, the bathroom scenes in comics are always an interesting, they're funny, but it's got to be an interesting challenge to figure out how to lay those out so that it's not too much.
Yeah. It's kind of a tradition now to buy a diary comics. You kind of have to dry yourself on the toilet.
Yeah.
We all do.
And so our next panelist is Stephanie. If you want to tell us about your contributions.
Sure. Hi, my name is Stephanie Nina Pitsirilos. I am a prose and comic book writer and public health advocate. And I'm fortunate to have worked with 2 fabulous illustrators, Seth Markel and Aaron Guzman, These two stories, the first one is Small Axe. It's illustrated by Seth Martell. And this story was actually fortunate to help raise some money in a digital anthology for Get Us PPE. And it's a story that follows a man who bridges the arts with medicine and the role that plays in community, particularly during this COVID pandemic, and challenges who we call as heroes. And I wrote the story as an ode to my husband, who's a physician, who does a lot of the work that you see in this comic strip. And the second one, Seasons of the City, is illustrated by Aaron Guzman. And with that one, I wanted to give a little bit of perspective of some of the challenges of going through this COVID pandemic with kids in a New York City apartment. Part of it stems from my beef with news anchors, seeing, this is local news, and you see the fireplaces in the backyard and the space and go outside and breathe, and, really can't relate to that. My experience going through living in an uncooperative co-op during a pandemic and some of those unique challenges, while also contextualizing all of these strains with New York City's gentrification and how those tensions play out during the pandemic.
Awesome. Thank you all for being here. I definitely relate to the frustrations with this idyllic, let's get outside and just enjoy nature thing. I live in downtown Worcester, and it's just concrete everywhere. There's no getting anywhere unless you have a car, in which many of us don't. So thank you all for sharing. And so I just want to start a conversation with everyone. I'll try to pitch questions and just jump in whenever you want to say anything. But so first I was thinking, many of your comics are collaborative team efforts. And so like and even if it's not, you're working in a different environment than usual, perhaps. So was creating these comics during the pandemic a challenge? Like, did it change your process at all? Did you have to come up with new ways of working together with an artist? Jason, I see you unmuted.
Sorry, that was by accident. I don't know what I'm doing. As far as changing working methods, I usually have a big Wacom Cintiq, but we wanted to isolate ourselves in an empty Airbnb so that we didn't, because we have elderly neighbors, and we just worried that we would infect them. So we were completely isolated, and I didn't pack up all of my usual stuff. I bought a sketch pad and some ink and a couple of dip pens. So I just, after I got well again, well enough to draw, I sort of was just sketching on whatever I could find. I used up the sketchpad pretty quickly, and then just sort of scanned it with my phone. I didn't have a scan or a printer or anything, so yeah, it was very sort of mercenary, kind of just figure out what I've got and then scrap it together. And I only had one bottle of ink, so I was being very precise about how I did my lines. Didn't do a lot of watercolor wash. It was just very sparing. And it sort of just fell out of me because I was just writing and drawing what I was experiencing. So I didn't have to come up with anything. I was just, it's like reportage. But yeah, definitely since then I've been doing a lot of stuff in that exact same method, just without, being on the verge of death.
Actually, Jason, Rich and I were wondering if you, in fact, drew that comic while you were sick. I mean, obviously not when you were extremely sick, but it sounds like that's something that you started after you were well on the way to recovery.
I sketched it in pencil while I was sick, and I was horizontal. Wow. For a lot of that time, I was on the ground in a sleeping bag, and I had the sketchbook, which that's how I filled it up with just pencil sketches of each day and what the symptoms were. Mm-hmm. And in the back of my head, sounds probably strange now, but I thought, well, if I die, then at least people will know what I was doing as I was getting worse. It sounds very morbid. I'm sorry, I don't mean to make light of it, but my response to death and horrible things is to draw it and to try and make it funny and palatable. Laugh at it if you can. It's probably not a healthy response, but it's all I've got. So that was what I was doing. I was scribbling down in rough pencil all the things that were happening so that I could ink them later when I was cogent.
Jason, did you find it cathartic to do that then? Like in the end, was it healing at all, or?
You know what? It was healing when I realized I posted it to Twitter and then it just took off because so many people were like, "Thank you. I had no idea what I was in for," and a lot of people, because there was so much uncertainty about the symptoms. I very clearly said, this is not medical advice. I'm not a doctor. This is just what happened to me. So hopefully it helps you. And there were people who were like, thank you. I knew to stock up on certain painkillers and things like that. So that part was very cathartic. That was like, wow, I did a cartoon that actually helped people. But honestly, it was because my wife caught it after me. And I was watching her go through all the same things as I was, 4 weeks earlier. So I was, there was a lot of sort of, oh my God, this is awful. I just thought, I better put this down on paper.
Hey, Sarah, do you have any thoughts on that question?
Well, I worked by my lonesome during lockdown. For me, the difficulty of creating the work was just the uncertainty of what was happening. Like, we've been incredibly privileged and lucky in Australia, compared to other countries with the way that the government and our health system have dealt with the virus. But there was we had no idea. So all up, we spent 8 months in lockdown. And, we didn't know how long that was going to go for, so when I'm writing a comic, I'm just like, how do I write into uncertainty, not draw conclusions or not paint a picture that's, overly complete when the whole situation could go whichever way. But yeah, I work digitally. So, I use an iPad with Procreate. So I have, access to like a whole palette of different, sort of painterly textures and pens. So I really, because my comic was trying to kind of celebrate the animals and the nature, I kind of really enjoyed, drawing all of the rainbow lorikeets and the figs and kind of celebrating the renewal of life after, devastating fires and sort of the coldness of the lockdown and the eerie empty streets. So my comics process technically didn't change much, but it was just a weird time to write without knowing what on earth's going to happen. So yeah.
Great, thank you all. So yeah, I know the working at home has been a change for a lot of us, I think, and maybe not as much, and so you all might be working at home more often than some of us to begin with. So Stephanie, when I was reading through your pieces, and Sarah, this came up in yours too, this concept of like the community, and I don't know if I read the word mutual aid in one of your comics, but that's just what kept coming to my mind, is thinking about how we need to, on the ground, help each other. And so what went into the thought process of depicting, the community living in this time and trying to work with each other?
Well, it's always tricky when you're doing a comic based on real life. You want to be true to the story, but you don't necessarily, want to make everyone look like the people that you necessarily interacted with. So there's a certain amount of, okay, how am I going to instruct the illustrator to draw this person? How is it going to still capture their essence? So there's definitely that aspect to it. It's, and especially if your story has layers of race, what are the power dynamics that are going? I know initially when we were figuring out, or gender, or even class, there's different levels. So like when Seth and I were figuring out how to do the page with the graffiti artist doing the gates at one point. The spoiler for if you haven't read it, but who turns out to be the physician, the man who's helping the graffiti artist do work is kind of standing with his arms crossed and looking over. And you know, I didn't want that sort of power dynamic displayed on the panel. So there's a lot of trying to make sure that you're telling the story and also being sensitive to the underlying messages that you might put in there.
Yeah, I might jump in with that in the context of my street, very small context. We live in a very kind of Italian and Greek area, and a lot of the residents here are quite old, so in their 70s and 80s. And so part of what spurred our, you know, wanting to share and connect is just wanting to make sure that people are safe and wanting to make sure that they have resources and information, you know, and that was a very sort of grounding and interesting experience, but also, you know, discovering the diversity of opinions about what's going on, you know, within our small bubble, you know, and the challenges with that. But yeah, I didn't explicitly call what was happening mutual aid. It was more just, you know, finding ways to connect and check in on people, you know, and just sharing. Like, again, we live in an area with a lot of fruit trees. So sharing produce was a nice and easy way to connect with different people that you might not have so much in common with. And also for me, for whatever reason, lots of families here with children don't have a printer at home, whereas I work from home. So I was the person on the street with a printer. So I became this printer person and print out the different children's assignments and peg them on the fence. And I'd make little sticky, you know, post-it notes like this with like a little message for the kids saying, have a great week, with a little picture, and just doing nice little things like that to try and, you know, keep up the morale or have a little surprise or something, and just doing what I can. Yeah.
Definitely cooking for neighbors was a theme in both of my, just to answer the other part of your question, Matt, I kind of answered half of it, but definitely cook those little things like cooking for neighbors. One of our neighbors did have COVID, elderly. So we would, you know, cook. I said, I got to cook for my 3 kids anyway. I'm cooking for you. I'd cook for you anyway, even if I didn't have those 3 kids. You know, those little things just made a world of difference, you know, putting pictures in the hallway to create a museum, since we can't go, you know, stroll. We're used to New York City, going out and about, going to our museums. So, you know, trying to recreate the outside world, kind of in a both depressing and happy way in our hallways. But sometimes those little things can bring a smile to people when they're going through hard things.
I should share that my neighbors, like I mentioned, I have elderly neighbors, and they've all lived in my building since they were squatters in the 80s. I'm in the Alphabet City. And one of them, it's a co-op, so one of them bought a gigantic box of like 1,000 rolls of toilet paper and put it at the base of the stairs and just said, take whatever you need. It was like and it was early, it was like early March, and we were like, oh my God, yes, thank you.
Oh, the toilet paper.
Can I quickly ask,
yeah.
In Australia, we've had like this ongoing thing of the great toilet paper shortage. Has that also been a big thing in the US?
Yeah.
It was the first thing to leave the shelves at every CVS. Yeah.
I can't help but wonder if that was spurred by everyone was worried about or talking about COVID as a flu. And so here everyone thinks it's a flu, it's a stomach virus when it's really not. But so I wonder if there's a link there. But yeah, the hallway, the art museum idea was, I really loved that in the comic, and it made me think of here we still have the city got people together to cut out like colored hearts to put in the windows everywhere as this sort of like appreciation to the frontline workers thing. Did that happen in your all's communities too?
Oh yeah. And after a while, you know, it became just, just became like, you saw it all the time. It became really common. But I remember, especially in the early days, we had just moved into this, condo complex. And I remember really early on, this is like at the end of March that we moved, which was its own set of stress, let me tell you, in a pandemic. And somebody had just put in big letters on their window, it said, better times are ahead. And it just, it was a lovely thing. I remember putting it on Instagram, just spread that little bit of hope there,
I have to say, when I took the artwork from the hall, it ripped off the plaster. So I had to tell myself to the horrible co-op. So it was nice, but
Oh no.
yeah. So it's, yeah.
That reminds me of the terrible plaster in dorm rooms. Like command strips are supposed to pull right off, but no, the whole wall comes with it. Yeah, Rob, you talk about the move in your comic a little bit, and that sounds incredibly stressful. Yeah, do you want to talk about that a little? Or?
Yeah, well, the thing, John and my husband and I, we literally didn't know when the lockdown. It was pretty much like very towards the end of March. They basically, Governor Walz, we're in Minnesota, in St. Paul, and the lockdown happened at the very end of March. We were scheduled to move then, and we literally were like, well, are the movers going to help us? I mean, can they do it? Are they allowed? Is it legal? We just didn't know. Meanwhile, we were moving tons of our own crap ourselves, because it was just from Minneapolis to St. Paul. So, but yeah, we finally got, it was just like a long 2 weeks of just, it was exhausting. And and I remember the movers didn't wear masks or whatever, but we just stayed away from them. And it just, you don't want to move during a pandemic, definitely. But we somehow muddled through, we made it through, and all the workmen coming in to do this or that, we just had to, isolate from them, and we got through it. I mean, I felt blessed through the whole thing that we had a shelter and that we were okay. But it was hard.
Yeah, moving is stressful at the best of times, especially if you're a book person. But no, and I was you mentioned the moving, so I went with that. But I wanted to ask you about, so all of you depict time in different ways in your comics, and Robin, yours in particular, with the clock that you had moved into the bathroom with the tick tick tick,
yeah.
in this sort of existential dread. That I've basically just been living in for all of this. How did you all decide how to depict time is this big metaphor and discussion in comics to begin with, but in particular, is it different for you to express that in a COVID comic? What led to the metaphor you went with?
It literally did happen. I was just, again, I was peeing. It's 5:30 in the morning, and the sound of that clock, just that, it just hit me. I just was really spooked by it. It was a real moment. And I thought, and like many cartoonists, I just thought, oh, okay, well, I can use that. Later on, I realized, okay, I'll put that in. That was the final comic of the series of 5 strips that I did. But otherwise, these are diary comics, and so they were dated. They were, one of them was on Easter Sunday when it snowed, and I was just they were all very much in the moment. I definitely didn't get into politics, because I'm still really angry about the past administration and how they bungled everything so badly, and when we're all suffering still because of it. So don't even get me started on that.
Yeah,
the timing. Sorry, go on.
No, please, Jason, go ahead. I'll go after you, Jason. Go ahead.
Okay. No, the only thing I mentioned with the timing is that I think with comics, just in general, the cartoonists we do get a little bit obsessed about that little gap of space between the panels. The whole Scott McCloud theory of comics and timing, and sort of, I've always been so fascinated with the artistic choices that comic artists make about how much time passes between panels and between pages and chapters, because you can really dig down into a single second across the span of however much space you want. And honestly, it's one of the great artistic freedoms of doing comics. But also, when I was making the diary comic, I I sort of had to remember which days I was experiencing which things in, because they started to blend together, as we're all now so used to, with this horizonless every day looking exactly the same life that we live. So trying to discern and differentiate which day was which was probably the biggest challenge in the whole thing.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting question because I never thought about that. And my two comics do also have a lot of different time periods. For Season of the City, I had to figure out, to Aaron's frustration, how do I cram a bunch of New York City history from 1977 to COVID in 5 pages, right? And you know, I think the devices that we use, newspaper headlines, I think the biggest thing is that history walks with you. So having your characters walking, but then you see in the background, like in small acts, you'll see sort of ghost images of memories of, first you'll see a graffiti gate with the art, but then as the character walks by, you'll see that character in the past painting that gate. So I find that a fascinating question. It's something that I don't think about as a writer, but there's so many fun ways that you can depict that in comics, and COVID certainly made us go in a sort of wormhole of time.
Yeah, and I can add one thing about time also, relating to putting this collection together. We put a call out in mid-April, at the time, thinking that we would come up with maybe a 100-page anthology, documenting the moment, but it, as we all know, it turned out to be a series of concatenated moments that never ended and sort of escalated into you know, larger problems. So I think some of what I like about this volume is that it documents, you know, it documents a not a process, but a let's just call it a process. You know, so we start with, you know, what it's like to have to be diagnosed with COVID and deal with it, flashback a bit to some of the pandemics, earlier pandemics. But then you also see, as you go through, how COVID sort of caused some other problems to escalate, such as social unrest. There's a section on you know, what happened with George Floyd and those other incidents. And then getting up towards the end, we have Eli's section of comics that highlight world leaders and how they responded to the problem. And this is actually a comic that Eli worked with Rich Johnson on. Rich was really keen on coming up with a comic that would sort of compare how world leaders handled the issue. And so that was his contribution. And then, yeah, so you definitely see the scale, I guess, is what I'm trying to say. You know, we start with, you know, this invisible virus that is affecting us personally, but then you get a sense of the scale of how this affected other parts of our existence. And I think that's kind of cool.
Yeah, Kendra, can you, speaking of scale and time and the order of things, like you and I have talked before a little about the layout of the book and the order of the stories. Can you tell us a little bit about how you decided to order the stories in the anthology?
Yeah, that was a real challenge, actually. So what I did was print out all the comics, and I had several iterations of comics on my floor in my house, you know, in one sequence, and then I would look, and then I would go away and come back and think no, and just rearrange that way. But what I wanted to do was, like I just said, you know, have a sense of the progression of time and how things changed, how experiences and reactions changed. But then also I needed to take into account different artistic styles. And I wanted to make sure that one comic following another would not clash stylistically or with color palettes, that sort of thing. And then, you know, some of these stories are really, really heavy and hard to read. And so I was trying to find a way to not to, you know, toggle back from, you know, haha funny to, oh, this is, you know, like death and then haha funny, but find ways to just sort of do this kind of thing so that the reader would maybe head down into a, you know, a bit of a depression, but then try to bring them back up. And yeah, it was a challenge. And then also you have the problem of, you know, comics that need to start on a recto page, for example, and others that need to start on verso. And then what I found was I had a bunch of gaps, right? Like one page that I needed to fill. And I had the great luck of meeting Ruby Handler Spitz, who, hi Ruby, I know you're here, who does brilliant work with single page comics. And so I know not everyone has seen the book yet, but what I was able to do was choose a handful of her comics and just sort of like place them in those one-page gaps. And then that her series kind of runs through the book as a leitmotif. I like to think sort of, you know, so helping out with the layout, but also offering this thread that is somewhat coherent. So yeah.
Kendra, like I've edited anthologies too, and I just related to everything you talked about. And you know, who my inspiration with doing and putting together an anthology is Heidi Klum, believe it or not, from Project Runway. She would say when people at the very end in the final show, they would you know, show their collection, and she said a collection should tell a story. And I just thought that's it. So like every piece builds to a bigger, it progresses and it tells a larger story. And that was, you know, that's just kind of a little method I used, you know, an overarching method to build it together. But I know it's challenging, but it's really fun too.
It is fun, isn't it? Yeah.
Because you could do so many different ways. You just have to decide.
Yeah.
I can't wait to see the book.
I mean, it's on its way.
And I really think that progression of Ruby's comic throughout does work. I'm lucky enough that I was able to read the book for this talk, and it does all flow very well together. But I think I've been saying it's a hard to read anthology, especially while we're still living in the moment, but it's necessary, and I'm grateful that it exists. I'm gonna ask another question real quick, but I want to remind everyone in a couple minutes, we're gonna try to answer some of your questions. So if you have any, please throw them in the Q&A, not the chat, the Q&A. And so, yeah, Kendra said the word scale, and kind of the scale of where we, you know, are experiencing life right now has shrunk quite a bit. So have you all mostly been staying inside? And I know in your comics, the scope of the story you're telling had to be shrunk probably from what you're usually illustrating and drawing and thinking about. So can you talk about how you handled scaling down to such a narrow window?
I can take that. Well, it boils down like a tweet I did like early on. I said, you know, when I first heard we had the lockdown, blah, 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 I said, you know, I got this. We're kind of introverts, you know, we're kind of homebodies, you know, but yeah, even I like really do need people. I really miss hanging out with friends at restaurants and you know, and I can't have my sister over without us wearing all these, you know, the masks and all that. And she's in a new relationship. We don't get to see the new guy that often. And I just, you know, I guess I just took it like I took drawing diary comics. I take it day to day. But I remember it got very wearing. Midsummer, I was ready to scream if I didn't get out and do something, get away. And we took a tiny little weekend trip for my birthday in Duluth, just up north. And that just really, that was helpful.
Yeah, I echo you with the introvert thing, but what I miss the most is sitting in a coffee shop. Like, I don't need to talk to anybody. I just need to be able to sit in public with public noise and read. That's just gone now.
Yeah, and be
Yeah,
with people with not necessarily interacting, but just being around them and just being that camaraderie of humanity, right? Kind of.
There is that strange thing with everyone living on top of each other here in New York, was that 7 p.m. everyone banging pots and pans out the window and clapping and screaming and cheering. It was this sort of reminder that all day long we're all pretty much quiet and there's less traffic in the air and on the road, so it's like eerily quiet. There's no hum of the city. Then all of a sudden at 7 p.m. you're like, oh yeah, there's still humans out there. Your question about scale, Matthew, I got so much more. I usually do a 3-panel comic strip every day, so this was a luxury. I had so much more room to explore and draw and, you know, and sort of put in little chicken fat, little like sight gags. And I because usually comic strips are shrunk down to the size of a postage stamp. So I actually this was a real luxury for me.
For me, it was definitely a big life change. Prior to COVID, we were co-living, co-parenting with my parents half of the school week. And when COVID hit, we had to bunker down in our other apartment. And, my baby was 2 at the time. She only understands that place as real home. And all of a sudden there's no grandma. So she had an emotional time trying to understand why her grandmother is now an iPad. And, that's a neighborhood I was born and raised. Upper West Side will always be my neighborhood. And that's my New York, and where I am is not. And, I'm reminded every day, I'm very blessed. I'm very grateful. But that was definitely a big change of life. Someone that used to walk 20, 30 blocks a day, duffel bag on the subway, going between apartments, out whenever I felt like it. My mom would watch the kids, go to this restaurant, the nice things, the cultural things, live show, music, all the reasons why people pay crazy prices to live in New York City, and being around community, all of that just went away. On the creative side, not commuting and not volunteering in the library. I play a librarian for my kids' elementary school. A lot of my creative time went there. So all of a sudden, I'm actually focusing on my own projects. So that, I'll never say, yeah, this has been great, but, for someone that's also an introvert and could just sit and write all the time outside of remote schooling, because now I'm a teacher too to my kids, it definitely allowed for me to do a lot more creative work.
I might just jump in and talk about scale and also kind of riff off the time question before. So here in Australia, things have definitely come in swells because we have this time lag from the rest of the world. So we kind of see, the storm coming, and then we get, a different kind of shape of that. And so that plus, the comic that I made about the bushfire is very kind of seasonal. And like, I was thinking a lot about kind of with the amount of distress globally, and particularly coming from the US, of just the absolute tragedy, when you're stuck at home, your line to the outside world is the internet, and just the huge mass of horror coming at you every day. And given in Australia that the context is different, I really noticed more the difference between, my grounded lived experience here versus what else is happening all around the world, and how necessary that was, but also how troubling it can be. And, when do you tune in? When do you tune out? Why? When do you have to just, come back here? And that's why I talk about kind of doing my emergency walks, state of emergency walks, which is about trying to get grounded and be like, I'm here, I'm safe right now, I'm alive and embodied, and I'm not living in the US, again because the media that we get in Australia is so US dominant, that it was kind of confusing to figure out what's actually going on, or who to listen to, and this huge kind of mess of thoughts and opinions. So scale was like a big thing that I played with and I'm still struggling with, you know, because COVID happens differently everywhere. So, you know, yeah.
For sure. All right, so I think we're gonna try to answer some of these questions. Sarah, you may have sort of answered this one a second ago, but Susan Squire asks, Sarah, can you reflect on how you feel now in Australia as things have gone so beautifully well?
So that's so nice that someone pointed that out, because you know, in the global context, we're very lucky here to have had such a responsive government and health services, as I mentioned before, and yet the level of frustration from people, because we've had very strict lockdowns, I think some of the strictest in the world, where, you know, you cannot go outside for more than an hour, you cannot leave past 5 kilometers from your residence. So very, very strict. And a lot of people saw that as, you know, an authoritarian, you know, thing. So we've had protests here against that. And there's a lot of real upset, particularly around how it's impacting the economy. All, you know, everyone's got an opinion about this stuff. So compared to other countries, yes, you know, very grateful, but there's still so much, you know, tension and upset and, you know, people's lives being affected really seriously here. So I don't know if I'd call it happening beautifully, but, you know, comparatively, you know, just feel very grateful. Yeah.
Sarah, can I ask, do Australians overall trust their government? Is this?
So we've had a real rise in QAnon stuff, and we've got various issues with the media. And I don't know if you know, but basically Facebook has blocked all media. So there's a whole bunch of stuff happening right now that's very spiky about media. Whose voices do we trust? You know, who has power around what's disseminated as information. I am biased, but I would say generally most people trust medical advice and the government, you know, to be doing the best. But there is a lot of kind of disagreement around that, and more kind of conspiracy stuff on the rise that's a bit of a worry. But yeah, I don't know how to compare that to the US with scale, and yeah.
It's a little disheartening to hear the QAnon stuff is global instead of, you know, just messing with us here.
Oh, well, a lot of people are just really scared and,
yeah,
you know, are being screwed over. And like, honestly, it's not surprising, you know, I think, because people are, you know, under really difficult circumstances, and, you know, what do you do? So,
yeah. So another question. Kevin Wolf asks, did you draw or write your comic for yourself, or to make a point that you wanted others to learn something that you thought they might not be aware of? If there was a lesson, what did you want the reader to learn?
I definitely had a message that I wanted to share, but further to Sarah's point about QAnon and people not trusting the information they were reading, and myself, every time I Googled COVID symptoms or COVID onset or anything I typed in, I got so many different responses because everyone was reporting different things. And then there was of course, the conspiracy theories. And it wasn't until I saw my family in Perth and friends and colleagues in Australia on Facebook sharing pretty dubiously sourced news items about COVID being a hoax. And I was like, yeah, this hoax feels like my lungs are filling with flour. It's not very hoaxy. And I felt actually scared for them. I felt scared for my family, and I felt scared for my friends in Melbourne and Sydney. I've got family all over Australia who I was like, oh, you guys haven't got this yet. There is, as Sarah says, there's this slight delay with Australia, which is a blessing in many cases, because you can see the tide go out and you have a minute to run for higher ground. But I wanted people to realize that this wasn't, people want to believe all sorts of things for all sorts of different reasons, but I wanted people to see someone they knew, either through, however they knew me, through a friend or anything like that, so that when someone did say, oh, this thing is just a Chinese hoax, or this is just a thing, the government are controlling us and trying to keep us inside. You know, there were limitless bullcrap stories that they could just point to something and go, well, what about this guy? This is the thing he did. And then, you know, inevitably Twitter blew up and was like, yeah, this guy's lying about the whole thing. You know, he's making up his whole story. There's no way to sort of convince people who don't want to believe something. But I did the story, the COVID diary got picked up and syndicated through the Washington Post Writers Group. So then it went around the country and then around the world, and so I was getting responses from people in Europe and particularly in Italy. A lot of people in Italy, sort of half and half. It was like half thank you and half like, oh, this is a hoax. This is Chinese. Like, it was really strange. So yeah, the reason I did it was for one thing, and then the reason I kept sharing it was because I kept seeing people I knew get sucked into conspiracy theories. So I was like, no, you need to know this is a real thing, otherwise you're going to die, probably.
Yeah, my stories very much answer Jacqueline Woodson's call in her novel Another Brooklyn, that we need to hear more New York stories of the marginalized. You know, not what publishing always puts out, not always the Sex and the City stories, the Friends, that type of New York City that I have no idea about, even though I was born and raised here. You know, this to just not be erased, you know, oh, New York City is a ghost town. No, we're here. We're actually here. There are still people here. Maybe you fled, you know, but there are living people still here. So I very much was wanting to document, and a lot of my writing does this, marginalized voices. In Small Acts, I very much wanted to you know, put in record a physician that bridges the arts with medicine, which institutions don't necessarily support, and it's always scrambling for tiny grants, and it doesn't get you tenure. But guess what? It builds community and it makes community happy. And my husband's message in that was just refuting this idea that medical workers, I am not a hero. If all of us did these little things, he's like, I signed up for this. What makes people heroes are these beautiful acts of love and kindness and community. So he very much wanted to make that statement, which I helped translate with Seth.
Great. Thanks. So another, we can get a one or two probably in before 8 o'clock. 8 o'clock my time. So Casey Counselor asks, says these comics are incredible and it's remarkable that you were able to get this book out so quickly. How do you think COVID comics and stories might shift after the immediacy of the pandemic recedes? This is related to a question I wanted to ask as well about these stories cover about the first 6 months or so of what we experienced in the Western world, quote unquote. I didn't notice much in the way of vaccines in the anthology. So is there something do you have another comic in you that you might post, or how do you think these stories are gonna live on after this?
Yeah, you know, I think that's a really good, I will share with you that I have been vaccinated. I have my day job, I work at a mental health clinics, and I am vaccinated now. And yeah, and I just think all the social justice issues that have come up. I mean, I felt kind of weird, guilty at first, and then I realized, no, I really want to be one more person out of the way, one more person done, because we have a lot of people to get. Millions of people have to get this, because otherwise this nightmare is never going to be over, right? So I just looked at it as my contribution to like getting through this. But you know, access to vaccine and stuff is a thorny issue, and of course a lot's going to come out, I think, as this goes on. And yeah, I think that I would not mind writing or drawing about that in some form. So yeah.
Anybody else have thoughts about the interest in these stories once we've gotten a little calmed down?
It's strange reading stuff about 9/11. And living in New York, I was living in Firth during 9/11, and all of my neighbors were here for 9/11. And Stephanie, I'm sure you were here for it. It's native New Yorkers talk about it in such a way that it was like, you know, it's a very deep personal thing that, despite some of the most eloquent, you know, some of them are writers and poets and speakers and performers and stuff, they just can't quite articulate the feeling that they felt when it was all happening. And I feel the same way about the pandemic, in that depending on where you are, your experience was different. New York was ground zero for the pandemic for an uncomfortably long time, and it was very difficult to try and articulate that to friends in the UK and in Australia before it you know, really hit there. And so sort of sharing stories like this and capturing them, trying in some way to vacuum up the zeitgeist of the moment and trying to just, you know, create like a time capsule of what your personal experience was. I think that's all we can really do. I love what Stephanie said before, that history walks with you. That's really great. I think that's all you have, is you have what you experienced, and you can express it through whatever vehicle you have, through whatever outlet you have, and that's all we can really do. So I'm glad that so many people did. I love, Rob, that you like all of the just day-to-day things that we were all doing, you know, that just felt like you, at some points, abject misery, and then just little tidbits of hope, and all those things, all of them sort of together feel like it's all a part of history. It's all part of something that 100 years from now people are going to be reading. And hopefully this is one of those books that they end up reading 100 years from now and go, boy, that pandemic really sucked.
Yeah, totally. I mean, it allows you to see, as a historical document, not only how different our experiences were, but how sometimes they were the same, you know, and you need that type of togetherness. Like, not that you want to all be miserable together, but, you know, to know that you're not alone. So both, you know, the difference and the sameness is an important historical document, I think.
Yeah, and what Stephanie, what you just said, the historical document part, and other conversations with cartoonists who were doing diary comics, like early on and from the beginning, in a different conversation, Ned Barnett and Maria Fodanakis were both talking about these as like the comics people are creating now are going to be, you know, primary sources for people studying this in the future, and as an item of record. That might be weird to think about as your work, but it's the kind of thing that will matter when people are studying this going on. So I see that there are some other questions in here, but I don't know how long I can keep you all past 8 o'clock. Kendra, you were going to say something real quick?
I was just going to say, just quickly, if I could address Shelley's question very, very briefly.
Yeah.
Sort of connects to what we were just talking about. Shelley's asking if we can, whether I saw any trends or differences from different regions, different parts of the world, and so forth. And we do have comics in this collection from creators from the US, Canada, Mexico, Turkey, France, Germany, England, Singapore, Australia, and I may have missed another. But what struck me and what made this such a joy, this project such a joy to work on, was that in spite of the differences, the slight differences in how people were affected by COVID, two things I think shone through most of the comics. First of all, the use of either drawing or reading comics as a way to think things through, or to process traumatic events, or to grieve and mourn. And secondly, even more, I think, importantly, is the idea that art brings us together, that these comics, through the medium of comics, you all are creating this sense of community that I think is really reaffirming for, definitely was reaffirming for me as a volume editor and for others who pick up the volume. You know, the power of art and the wonderful work that you all do as comics artists. So thank you for that.
Thanks, Kendra. Stephanie, I think you wanted to answer a question that I can't see anymore.
Yeah, I think it disappeared because I typed it quickly just in case, because I wanted that person to get their answer. But I think the question was specifically to me on my experience in working with illustrators. How did I find out about this? How do I know them, or something like that? Yeah, all my answers, everything that I said is together with the illustrators I work with. This is a team. They were part of the magic in figuring out how to tell these stories. So Aaron Guzman and Seth Martell, hats off to you. But how did I find out about this? This is, you know, thank you, Seth Martell. We met at a Comics Forum Comics Experience, and he approached me about this submission. We had the comic from the Get Us PPE, Heroes Need Masks anthology, and we were fortunate to have it placed. And you know, I wanted to tell my story, and Aaron has a different style than Seth. I said, you know, let's just try it, and you know, it got in, and I was happy about it. But I think you asked me, how do I know them? One from a comics experience, and Aaron's my cousin. We do comics together.
That's great. Well, I don't want to keep anyone too much longer, so I want to thank all of our panelists for coming and everyone for their great questions. Kendra, do you want to say a little bit about who this book is dedicated to and where some of the proceeds are going before we leave?
Yeah, thank you for that question. I did want to point out that the book is dedicated to our frontline workers and to those who lost their lives to COVID-19. When I sent this book back to production in October, we were looking in the US at about 222,000 lost souls. And sadly today, I think we're this week, we will be hitting 500,000. So to all the frontline workers who continue to work and expose themselves to dangers and do some really wonderful work for the rest of us. And also want to point out that this is in fact a charity project. I want to thank all of the contributors for donating your work. The volume editors have donated our work, and a portion of the proceeds from the sale of this volume will go to BINC, which is the Book Industry Charitable Foundation, in order to benefit the comics retailers and the booksellers, graphic novel booksellers, who have in fact suffered a great deal because of this pandemic. So if you purchase this book, know that some of your dollars are going to go to a very, very good cause.
And hopefully you purchase it from an independent bookstore, right?
Yeah.
Like the Seminary Co-op.
Yeah, exactly.
Awesome. Well, thank you everyone for coming and for sharing with us. It was great to talk to you all tonight, or this afternoon for you, Sarah. And I hope all of our attendees have a great weekend.
Thanks, Matthew.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks a lot.
Okay.